Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. My name is Steve Donaldson and I'm your host and moderator for this evening. This is the second in our series of philosophical dialogues with everyday people. And tonight's topic is, what is evil? Let's get the ball rolling like we did in our last episode by first doing some introductions. We'll start on my far left, and if you could just introduce yourself and give a sort of one-line brief reaction to the question.
Sure. My name is Mike Grosso, and I'm not absolutely certain what evil is, but I do know, and I am convinced, it's far more interesting than the good as such.
I'm Uri U.J. Fields, and I think I'm convinced of what evil is. Evil is one of the faces of reality. Good is the other one. I have been impacted by evil quite a bit, but I've been impacted by good even more.
My name is Scott Van Bergen. I think that evil is the ultimate negation of the good, so part of our challenge tonight will be to actually define what is the good.
My name is Ariel McLean, and I think that evil has to have something to do with intelligence, as in capacity, and also intention, and it has a human element to it.
My name is Tony Potter, and like many people, since 9/11, I have suddenly been seized by a palpable sense of the reality of evil, probably more so than I ever had before. And since then, I've been compelled to try to understand it and see if there's anything we can do to help, as the prayer says, deliver us from evil.
My name's Jerry Hummel. I think a good shortcut to think about what is evil is to ruminate on three of the anagrams for evil: live, veil, and vile.
I'm Jen Benedict, and I'm not sure exactly how to define evil, but I'm pretty sure that that stuff that forms in the fruit bin of your refrigerator when you haven't looked in there for a couple months, it's kind of liquid with fur on it, definitely qualifies.
My name is Jeff Johnson, and I guess I think that evil is a sort of a nebulous, it's a primordial nebulous element of the universe, basically. And for example, if you think that the Pythagorean theorem didn't exist before humanity, then that puts you on one side of the evil question. And if you think that it did exist, before, then it is a human thing, and it's something that in a short life lived we have to tackle with it. We'll never be able to prove it what it is, but we can only labor it.
Good evening. My name is Carol. Evil feels like poison that seeps into the crevices of humanity and destroys everything around it.
Okay, great. Who wants to sort of bounce off of what we've already opened up? I think Mike over there has something he wants to add.
Well, I've got a thought that I'd like to just throw out that might trigger some responses. For a long time, it struck me that the most insidious kind of evil that we have to face in this world is evil that masks itself behind good. If you think about some of the worst things that have happened on this planet from the get-go, they're usually done under a banner of goodness, nobility. I could give all kinds of examples. I'll just mention a couple. Certainly the Russian and the Chinese revolutions involved massive exterminations of innocent people. They were done in the name of a great vision of the classless society. You mentioned a while ago 9/11. I don't think any of us have any doubts, at least on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, that was a massively evil event. On the other hand, those who perpetrated that event, and many others on this planet, think it was a good thing. Not just a good thing, a noble and a wonderful thing. So we're in very tricky territory here. And without, I just want to start the ball rolling with that thought.
Right.
And I'll leave it.
Okay.
At that, yeah.
Jen.
Well, I think that sort of ties in with what Ariel was saying in her reaction to the question about intentionality, which is my question to what you've said now would be, are there sort of degrees of evil? If one thinks that, masking evil as good could happen as a result of actually thinking what you're trying to accomplish is good, as opposed to knowing that you're trying to do something that would be bad and have widespread bad results. So is it a question of good versus bad or good versus evil? And what part do ignorance and intention have to play in that? I just want to throw that out there.
Good. Okay, Scott, you're next.
Well, I think ultimately to judge something or some person as evil, you have to understand what their thought process is. It's possible to commit widespread destruction purely on accident or purely of the best and most noble intentions. When Harry Truman decided to drop the atomic bombs on Japan, he certainly caused a great number of people to die, certainly caused a lot of destruction. But in order to judge that act evil, you have to know what his motivations were. Did he actually want that destruction just because he enjoyed seeing it, or did he think that it was necessary to serve some larger purpose?
Okay. Jerry.
Kind of picking up where Scott just left off, I'm reminded of a philosopher who said that there is no moral phenomena, there's only a moral interpretation of phenomena. So I think to some extent it's in the eye of the beholder. You were talking about ignorance as being a part of it. Some people, I think, believe or say that people always try to do good to the best of their knowledge. No one would intentionally do something that they thought was bad. So it kind of depends on your perspective, where you're coming from. In some cases, you could make a case that there's virtues to the typical traits that we think of as evil: strength, dominance, passion, those type of things. It just kind of depends on the context. So we're kind of get very easily into relativity in the context that you're talking about, the situation.
So Jerry, do you think it's, you personally, do you think it's totally relative, or is there some way you can tell the difference between, the real evil? Will a real evil stand up, or is it totally relative?
In my mind, it's pretty clear. Kind of my reaction to that is I think during the 20th century, I guess I'll be the first to bring up, the concentration camps, Auschwitz, and all that. It seems like we've had a sort of a radical evil that's happened in the 20th century. In the past we've had, terrible things like the Spanish Inquisition and Crusades and things like that. But, the 20th century with, say, Auschwitz, the forced labor. We had factories that were producing corpses. Just Cambodia, Bosnia. That type of thing is maybe what I immediately latch on as being evil. It just seems like a pure form of it. It's almost incomprehensible, that degree of evil.
Okay.
Well, Jeff, let us not put all the evil beyond our boundaries, because here in this country, the United States, our evil perhaps parallel the evil of any evil that has been done in the world, all the way back from slavery and so forth and so on. But the point is, there is evil and there is good. And it seems to me that to a great degree that man is evil by nature. There's an innateness of evil. And it's like saying there is darkness in the day and there is light in the day. The two exist. They're two sides of the same coin. As I said earlier, there are two faces to reality. And so my concern is not so much with what is evil, because we know what evil is in the sense that anything that leads to destructiveness is evil. It may be a matter of degree. And that which, of course, promotes good then of course that is the opposite of evil. Now, sometimes we say this is evil, it's bad, it's wrong. And then with good, we may say that it is good or it's right. And I see that it's something that we need to look at, because evil is a personality. And so when you put the D before evil, you get the devil. And that's exactly what evil is, the devil. And when you take O out of good and put it in God, you get good. And so this is what we are dealing with, good against evil, but evil comes in many forms, many degrees, and it's in all of us. So the idea is, how can we lessen evil in any given situation and maximize good? That's the only thing we can do.
All right, thank you. Carol's next.
Well, I have to deviate a little bit from the group philosophy right now. And to me, evil is evil. You don't put it on different levels. Any act is evil. And anything that causes harm or destruction or pain to another human being or society or to our environment, then that is an evil act. And I find it, in my mind, very difficult to believe that anyone who commits one of these atrocities does not know that they are committing a very harmful and evil act. We do give permission to evil, and that is a whole other thing.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to UJ and, for the record, state my own view in contrast to UJ's. I do not believe in the existence of the devil. I do not believe in the existence of an independent personal spirit that represents pure evil. If one wants to believe, that's one's business. But I think it's a dangerous idea. For one thing, one of the dangers of that idea is that we often tend, and this has been done throughout history, and you mentioned the Holocaust, it was certainly done with the Nazis against the Jewish people, we have a tendency to project our vision, our concept of absolute pure evil onto people, groups of people, types of people. So at any rate, I think that happens to be one of the more dangerous ideas. I can understand how it might serve a rather entertaining purpose in literature and in drama. The devil is in Milton's Paradise Regained is far more interesting and dramatic a character than any other character. So that's what I meant when I said earlier that evil is more interesting. But there is a serious move that you're making when you jump from a literary metaphor that absolutizes and personalizes pure evil and start conjuring up an entity for which I do not believe there is any reason to believe in its existence.
Okay, Tony.
This is tricky because I wanted to respond to Carol's. I also find what you said very interesting, Mike, but I wanted to back up. Jen, you mentioned in the beginning that you thought something in your refrigerator was evil, which I thought that was great. But I wonder if you really think that something in your refrigerator could be evil. I wanted to ask Carol, for example, you said anything that caused suffering was evil act. Would you, for example, and I'll give you the microphone afterwards so that we can hear the answer, would you think that an earthquake, for instance, or a hurricane is evil?
You're really putting me out on a limb, aren't you? That's a course of nature. How can you define a course of nature? Does it have a thought? Does it plan? I don't think you can compare the two.
So the answer is no.
No.
We'll need to keep the format going back and forth so we can get the microphones working correctly. So, Scott, I think you're next.
I think it's important to confine evil only to those things and those persons who we regard as fundamentally at odds with the good, and not just somebody who's maybe a little bit corrupt or something that's a little bit destructive. Certainly, I can regard many people as immoral, to varying degrees without regarding them as evil. So I think, for me, in order for somebody to be regarded as evil, they have to actually desire destruction for its own sake.
So, Scott, I want to stick with that a little bit because I see perhaps what seems that might be a contradiction or paradox, but I think if we make a particular distinction, we can work that out. Because I see sort of what you're saying is the importance of taking intention into account, that it's intended to be destructive. And yet we also had, as Mike pointed out, the case where the evildoer is in fact thinking or that they're doing it for a good cause, or they're being doing something noble. Or so in their own mind, would they necessarily be thinking, I'm the evildoer? And if not, how do you then use your criteria of intention to distinguish who's evil and who's not?
Well, you'll rarely find, if ever at all, anybody who's self-consciously evil. Certainly Hitler and Stalin and Osama bin Laden had their own idea of what they were doing as being somehow good. But it's ultimately up to us as individuals to judge them, and to some extent we have to infer their actual intent. And we can go wrong sometimes, but I think if you look at a pattern of behavior of consistently pursuing destruction and death, I think we're warranted in regarding that as evil.
Okay. Jen?
I think this sort of comes back to what I've been thinking about, intentionality versus ignorance of foreseeable outcomes. And like Carol was saying, an earthquake, and like Tony sort of let out of that, was an earthquake itself cannot really be evil because it's a course of nature. So I think that we would have to say that if it's possible for a person and a person's actions to be evil, there's some sort of distinguishing thing. And I think that evil is perhaps kind of an upgraded version of wrong action or destructive action, in that someone could be doing an evil action if they do something which they can foresee as being destructive. And my personal sort of idea about what makes something evil or what leads to evil action is sort of tied in with ignorance, and then adding intentionality onto that. We only do things, I think, well, this is the Socratic paradox. If we knew what was right action, would we ever do anything but what's right action? But I think that wrong action, or action which is destructive, comes partly from an inability to understand one's place within the cosmos or within society, and how what you do might affect others adversely. I think that taking it from bad to evil requires some understanding of that, or a willful ignorance towards the outcome of one's actions. Basically, by saying, I don't care whether what I'm doing is going to hurt anyone else or not, or I know it's going to hurt other people, and yeah, I like that. I think that's what kind of kicks you up the notch from bad to something we might call evil.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Ariel?
I have a real hard time with this. First of all, what about, like, there are some species where the mother eats the young, and this is part of the natural homeostasis of that family. What if human beings had some kind of a biological trait that is interpreted as evil to someone else? I think it's interesting that in this entire time, every single person has said something in relation to man and evil. It's like we can't think of evil as an entity in itself. It's associated with humanness somehow. And that kind of supports my original thought, which is that I think evil has, it's the task of man to decide what evil is for this time and this place and this, society and this set of mores, and that basically is what we're here to do.
Okay. Jerry?
But I think we have to be very careful about labeling an act or a person as evil. Saying something is good or saying something is evil, these are categories of convenience, if you will, for very complex things once you really think about them and dig into them. I get uncomfortable when something is said very cavalier as labeled evil, because when you label something as evil, it's kind of like putting a big period down or a stamp on something, and what it does is it silences thinking, and it demonizes that act or person, and just out of a refusal maybe to understand what motivated that act or what's motivating that person. I just think that you have to be very careful about calling somebody or an act evil, and if you do, you better have a good reason, because I think there's such a heavy connotations with it that are very serious.
Do you, along those lines, do you think that evil then is a matter of degree, or is there a particular line between? In other words, is it just a question of how horrible is it, or whatever, and the sort of the degree of horror? After a certain point, we tend to call it evil, and that there's really no separate thing as evil. Is that what you're suggesting? Well,
I was kind of nodding inwardly to what Jen was saying. I think there is maybe a spectrum to it, and there's kind of a line that can be crossed. There are acts or willful intention, taking glee and maybe causing suffering that maybe kicks you up to out of bad or being irresponsible into evil.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mike.
Well, I want to agree with Jeff about being very cautious on several grounds to ascribe evil to people, to persons, or even to institutions or to whole nations. Our president has a habit of, I think, being rather clumsy in his locutions of evil, and I don't think it helps matters the way he addresses and frames the problem. But that's another thing. I wanted to get back to a point that Scott made, and that's been suggested. Maybe I misunderstood you. I agree that intention is a big part of the phenomenon of evil, but I would say that it's a mistake to identify evil with intention, for the simple reason that it then gets you into the difficulty that you have to say that 9/11 was not evil, because those who perpetrated that act honestly believed they were doing the right thing and a good thing. They believed it, and they expected, and we hear about this constantly, various people who are subscribed to certain points of view and conceptions of reality and good and evil think, for example, by murdering an infidel, it's a guaranteed that you end up in paradise, and that's a good thing. Their intentions are good for themselves, for their people. And nevertheless, it seems to me that I would not agree that their actions are good and are not evil. So evil may be present, rather intention and evil intention may be present in the performance of an evil act, but by itself, the absence or the presence of intention, I do not think, in my opinion at any rate, is decisive for characterizing what is truly evil. I think the evil lies in the event itself. Now, in response to what you said a while ago, Carol, I understand the difference between evil that's produced by moral agency, and I think we really, react to that with sort of visceral horror. On the other hand, I wouldn't say it's a good thing when an earthquake occurs or a hurricane occurs and innocent people are destroyed, mangled, their lives are wrecked. It's bad stuff. It's evil stuff. There's an evil that nature causes, and there is an evil, and it's very different from the evil that's caused by human beings. And by the way, that evil that we can observe resulting from the misbehaviors and wild antics of nature is often used by philosophers as an argument against the existence of God. It's known as the problem of theodicy in philosophy. and it's a topic we could talk about if you're interested, because evil is a real problem for individuals who believe in the existence of an all-good, all-loving God. And the evil that is a problem is not the evil that's generated by human beings, but because we say they're responsible. God is off the hook, no problem there, logically. On the other hand, when there's an earthquake and innocent people are mangled, destroyed, and suffer, that is a result of a nature that was created by God. And that seems to be inconsistent with the idea of God being an all-perfect, all-loving being. So evil is problematic from a theological point of view.
Mike, bear with me for a minute.
Sure.
Because I want to kind of ask you the same question I asked Scott, because it seems like you have the sort of the flip side, but it's the same question of the role of intent. Because I think we can talk about the intent of doing good as a noble act, but I think there's also the distinction of the actual intent to, say, do the destruction. In other words, it wasn't an accident. Let's take the 9/11. So we kind of have like two intentions. One is this is going to be for some greater good, but the intention was definitely to cause a lot of destruction and death and so forth. So wouldn't you agree that the intention to do destruction, commit destruction, somehow is important? Because if they flew into the towers by accident, for instance.
Absolutely,
right.
Absolutely. That's why we distinguish between first-degree murder and manslaughter. The intent adds to the culpability. But what I'm saying is good intent would not exculpate you from committing an evil act, an act that is murderous and destructive. That's my point.
So what would be the hallmark, is what I'm trying to get at.
I don't think it's that simple. I don't think there is one hallmark. I think you need to analyze a lot of different variables and go and do a case-by-case analysis. Some evil is a result of natural events. Some evil is a result of intentional events by human beings. And intentions can be mixed up. It's a complicated issue.
So for you would focus on just the results?
I would say that's one of the determining things for me to evaluate something as evil, yeah.
Okay.
But I'm sure there's a counterexample to anything I've said, too.
Oh, okay, great. Tony, you're next.
Okay, let's see if I can hold all this in my brain. I've got to go back. I like Ariel's idea that human nature is somehow involved in evil. I'm less inclined to accept that natural events are evil, even though they cause suffering. I think they introduce an opportunity for evil to show its ugly head, but they also show the opportunity for people to do wonderful, magnanimous things. I like Jen's idea that being aware of the results of one's actions and being ignorant of one's actions is somehow plays into what is evil and what is not evil. And I kind of think that one way to break out this problem of intention is to think, rather than in terms of sins of commission, think of the sin of omission. If one is indifferent to the suffering that will result from one can have good intentions, as I'm sure those terrorists did on 9/11, but they were indifferent to the suffering that was to be caused. And there are times when one is probably morally responsible to be aware of the results of one's actions, so that even if you're ignorant, you are not off the hook. And so if you look at the indifference to the suffering as a key, and also one of the other things I did after 9/11 was go online and see what everybody else was saying, and there's one quote that was flying around everywhere that I loved from Solzhenitsyn that said that the line, I'm going to quote it wrong, but something like, the line between good and evil is not drawn between nations, but it's drawn in every human heart. And I think if we realize that each of us is capable of evil, in fact, when we are indifferent to suffering that we know about, even if it's way over in Afghanistan, even if it's in southern Africa, no matter where it is, that's a little bit of evil inside us. And we can't escape it. We are all guilty, we are all complicit in a little bit of evil. But there are situations in which I believe I subscribe a little bit to the slippery slope that we're all stained with the sin of indifference, because there's a limit to how much care and love one heart can pour out. But also, there are times when you get to a tipping point. But I think it's evil all the way down the line, just like it's turtles all the way down. I think the little bits of evil we're all responsible for, and I think there are huge acts of terrible evil, and you just wonder how completely twisted the human mind can be to bring itself to the point at which it can go to the tipping point of actually causing so much suffering.
But Tony,
Go ahead.
I certainly agree with the fact that evil is in all of us. There is no one exempted because it is innate. And intentionality plays a role, but it's really choice. And yet, this sounds a bit contradictory. We really don't have a choice other than the choice we make, because the only choice that we can do, really, only thing we do is what we do. Now, usually when people do evil, there's a payoff. Like anything else, that's a benefit. And sometimes that benefit is not just for a single person. Someone mentioned our attitude toward other nations and the evil axis or whatever. Well, that's a payoff, and it's a corporate thing. What benefit comes to people politically or whatever their payoff may be? So I think we have to look at the fact that like good produces certain benefits, evil also produces certain benefits. I am not about to be concerned so much with what we do to really eradicate evil, because the only way you can eradicate evil is to eradicate ourselves, and then the human race would be extinct. And I don't think any of us want that. Now, what I see is the solution, and this is very important to me. The solution is, how can we integrate creatively evil and good? And so in the process of this creative integration, if you want to call it, we are able to minimize the evil in a situation and maximize the good. And that is like saying bring more health and less illness, more harmony and less discord. That is the only choice that we have in terms of solution.
Right, thank you. Jeff's next.
I was going to say, I should say sort of a little bit to that, using, in defining a term, when you use the term in your definition, and you're not really defining the term.
Which term are you talking about?
Evil.
Okay.
And I also wanted to make the point that I'm being kind of a pain here.
Go ahead.
I think we've got a cause and effect problem in our dialogue here a little bit, and to the extent that we're talking more about the manifestations than we are about what is evil.
Oh, okay.
It's like if we were discussing what is red, and we were talking about the fall colors in the trees, or fire trucks, or maroon versus red. And then finally, I wanted to say that, for example, I'm learning by this dialogue, which is an interesting thing. I'm reminded of Plato in the Symposium. Last time we talked about what is love. He wonders in that Symposium whether love is a god. And that's kind of that more primal questioning that I'm talking about, that we maybe should be doing. My instinct is to say that a person either thinks that evil existed prior to human beings. This is why I mentioned the Pythagorean theorem at the beginning. Either it existed before human beings, or it's a human, possibly, construct. If it's a human construct, then you're really not talking about evil. You're talking about, I think like Jerry said, a point of view. And then you're into the relativism. If you think it happened before, then you're talking about something primal, and then you're getting into, well, maybe you should read some religious studies.
Well, wouldn't you have a third possibility there, which is the co-creation, co-evolution, that with man also this, because what I'm thinking is, I like your distinction of, well, not how does evil manifest itself, but what is evil itself? And one of the things that came to my mind is it's often described as a force, or a power. Another word that comes to mind is a drive. And what do you think?
Well, when I've been thinking about this for the last few days, somewhat, and I've actually become much more interested in the last few days in reading some scripture, actually, to see how it is that because it, you get into this concept of like Mike's talking about the devil, and that spirit. There's some spirit, some primary thing that was operating or was somehow put in the world beside the uncaused cause, God or whatever you want to call it. So anyway, I'll pass the mic.
Yeah, I think this is really important part of the conversation here, because we're really getting into some nitty-gritty. Spirit would be another term, and that can mean a lot of different things, but it can mean similar to a power or a drive or we were talking about the importance of intention, choice. These are things that we tend to associate with humans as opposed to animals, although there may be a sort of a gray area. But so I would wonder if that with the advent of intention, will, and so forth, we also had the advent or the possibility or the creation of this thing, whatever it is. Would that be sort of in between the two choices that you gave?
Then Steve, and you get into the idea of free will. And
right. Yeah.
Is it possible? If morality, if evil was something that was an evolutionary thing, then you're kind of almost arguing, in a sense, for the idea that really we don't have free will.
Well, we'll leave that one open for now.
So.
That's a good topic right there. Scott?
Well, I think actually free will is what makes evil possible. I don't agree with the idea that evil is inherent within us, that it's a part of us, that we are all part good, part bad. I think the fact that we have free will makes us perhaps susceptible to evil, but also we can choose good actions. Frogs don't have free will, therefore frogs can't be evil. Frogs can only be frogs. Even if somebody sticks their hand into a tiger's cage and the tiger bites the hand off, the tiger's not evil, the tiger's just being a tiger. They don't have free will in the sense that humans have it. So I think that that is kind of the trade-off, that when you have free will, you can choose to pursue great and wonderful things, and at the same time, you can also choose to pursue horrible and evil things.
Okay. Jerry?
Yeah, I agree with Scott. I don't think we're inherently evil or inherently good. I think we have the potential for both. And I believe that our choices in life, I think there's kind of a chain of causes, if you will. Something came up the other day, and I was thinking about this, and just like the little choices that you make, like the little rules or morals that you may break, how many of those have to add up before the bigger things like murdering somebody or raping somebody seems like that's okay? I mean, it almost seems like sometimes I think there's maybe a kind of like branches of a tree or something. You start going down one, and you take this fork in the road, and you take this one and this one. It can lead you to, an evil place, if you will. But I think you always have the option of redemption, and you can also go back. I don't think there's without hope. But I think if you go down one of those paths far enough, it's very hard to turn around and go back the other way. I think it becomes more and more difficult. I think you get mired in that place and that thinking that you're in.
I'm still curious and wondering about the hallmark or characteristic of evil. Is it just a question of how? Is it destruction, or having an emotional reaction that such and such was horrific? is that the hallmark? I mean, how do you recognize evil?
Well,
And in particular, in relationship to whether free will or intention are involved, because certainly we talked earlier about earthquakes, for instance. So it couldn't just be that, oh, that was a horrible event, and it was a very destructive event. This, well, for you would be the hallmark that makes it evil.
For an earthquake, or what are we talking about here?
No, to make to call something evil. What is the hallmark? If it, I mean, because you were describing going down a road that is destructive and it's a horrific, but isn't there more that's required to actually, call it evil than it's just destructive and horrific?
I feel like I just had something brilliant I wanted to say, but it's gone now.
Okay, well, you can
so I'll pass the microphone.
Yeah, okay. Ariel's next here.
Yes, I think that it keeps getting back to two things for me. Capacity. If you think of young children that kill other people with a gun, a 4-year-old, a 7-year-old. I mean, there is a level in the legal world where that isn't an evil act, because that being didn't have the capacity to exercise, I guess you would say, free will. So capacity, it has to be intentional. There has to be some kind of intelligence or awareness or understanding. There has to be capacity. And again, notice how we can't define evil independent of man's hand doing it, interpreting it, analyzing it, perceiving it, feeling it, talking about it. I mean, it's like we can't separate it. So I keep going back to the same thing that I started with, which is that the function of evil is for us to ask this question, and for a society to draw the line.
Okay, Carol.
Well, I want to comment on what you, Jay, said about bringing evil and good together. I can't even imagine that. I can't imagine how you could even consider combining the two of them. They're so separate. And Ariel, what she suggested about the changing of cultures and attitudes as we go throughout society as to what is evil, I totally agree with that. In one society, a woman can be stoned to death because she gets pregnant without being married. In another society, she's very well taken care of. So it depends so much on your concept of evil and the culture you're in. And Jerry, I think we have to be able to define evil. We have to be able to look it in the eye and say, this is wrong, this is evil. And if we don't, we're giving permission to that evil to expand and grow and corrupt more and create more evil.
Carol, hang on for a second, because that example of the cultural difference, though, I want to make sure I understand. Now, in their culture that you said a woman might be stoned to death for being pregnant out of wedlock, now, are you saying that that's not evil in a certain context, or that wouldn't there be a larger context that includes both the contexts of the different cultures that you talked about? In other words, is there an absolute standard, or is there no absolute standard?
It's so hard to define, because in the culture where the woman is stoned to death, they feel that, do they have a conscience? Do they feel the woman's pain as she's being, being stoned and hurt and beaten? I can't conceptualize, because I'm from a different culture. And to me, that would be absolutely horrible.
Mm-hmm. I guess my question is there a perspective that is clearer, that you can say, okay, from this perspective you can clearly see it's evil, even if somebody else doesn't see it? Or is it strictly relative, that you can't really make a determination if it's evil or not?
when I knew what the topic was about evil, I went and I bought a book titled Evil. And I have been reading this, Eat, Sleep, and Breathing this book on evil for 2 weeks now. So I know more about evil than I ever wanted to in my life. And I realize I'm totally sheltered. You know, I maybe have been brushed, but I have not been hit with evil. And, you know, the more I think about it, I think it's almost like a form of insanity. That evil is a form of insanity.
Okay. Okay. Michael.
I'm going to try to respond to your question, Steve, about the hallmark. I would suggest that your question, which is naturally philosophical question, is premature, and for the following reason. I think it would be more useful, we're not going to be able to solve this or do this evening, but I would favor something like the following, that we try to look at all kinds of different context, situations, and examples of evil, preferably beginning with our own personal experience. You say you haven't been hit that hard. It may be that, you know, evil does not necessarily come in spectacular forms. It may be very subtle things. When I was a kid, I moved from one place around the corner to, before I was 5 years old, to a neighborhood where I was surrounded by kids that were all a little older than me. And so I was the kid that they picked on. And for years, despite my resistance, fights in which half the time I got beaten up, these kids tormented me. And it was not illegal. It's the kind of thing, just kids bullying other kids. But question, was I experiencing evil? I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. Depends on how you define it. So I think your question is, as I say, premature in the sense that we need to look at the phenomenology of evil, the different shapes and forms it assumes, and then case by case build up a complex picture of what's really going on. And then maybe at the end of a long exploration, largely personal to begin with, we might be able to come to some kind of satisfying general conclusion.
Yeah, I want to hang on there for a second. Because I had this thought earlier, too, that rather than trying to, from an intellectual point or perspective or avenue, get at the definition, whether or not, because I kept thinking of what Jerry's talking about, something being horrible, horrific. Well, for me, horrible is defined by an emotional reaction. If you witness something horrible, it's horrible because you're horrified. And I'm wondering if there's an emotional, physical, bodily reaction that tells you, I think I'm in the presence of evil, or something evil is going on, or because I think, you know, there may be something that's different than, oh, they're just being mean or bad, or, you know, and I was wondering if you thought that.
Off the top of my head, I would just to take a shot. I would say something about gratuitous pain. I mean, I wouldn't use the word pain to describe a toothache, or evil to describe a toothache I have. But the pain of, let's say, being humiliated, being insulted, having my dignity put upon, treated in an inhuman and insensitive way, and not even necessarily in a physically brutal way, although I certainly wouldn't exclude that. But a certain kind of gratuitous pain would be, for my money, a good psychological indicator, a moral indicator of the presence of evil.
I see a combination here, something we were talking earlier with Scott and so forth, where there's the intention of, you know, the gratuitous focus on, you know, on the pain or the destruction or whatever, while at the same time having a, quote, good intention or even a celebration. It's almost like this juxtaposition between celebrating suffering, in a way. Are we getting close there?
Or enjoying it. Enjoying inflicting it.
Yeah. Jen, you're next.
Well, I want to say I sort of agree with your perception of that, because I was picked on as a kid, too. And I sometimes wonder, like, were they evil, or is that just how kids are? But I wanted to say something sort of about the relativistic view of evil, and this is going to be sort of a difficult point to articulate, because I think that evil is in a way defined in a matrix of relationships. I think it comes about from preferring your own immediate gratification or something that you have in mind for you or your own side over other people. And I think that that comes from an ignorance of not seeing the equality of all people, and not recognizing that we each have, about being human, something in us which puts us all on the same level, really. And I think that, like Ariel was saying about evil's business is sort of to force us to recognize it or to interrogate what it is. But I'm not sure that we should really try and do that as a society. Because then we have that sort of problem. Are we going to go around and start smiting people or stoning people, saying, well, we've all decided that what you did was evil, so we're going to kill you. And it depends on what kind of majority you get and how people are thinking about that. And I'm not sure that that should be our primary aim in thinking about evil, is so that we can pick it out when it happens to us. That's sort of a stoic idea, I guess. Maybe if I took my own advice, I'd be a lot calmer. Do as I say, not as I do. But, yeah, I mean, we could sit around and say, oh, that earthquake was evil because look at all the suffering that it caused. Evil. Oh, we're being put upon. Evil, 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 and get really upset about it. But I think that the real task which evil sets for us is recognizing when we are starting to become willfully ignorant of the equality between people and how interrelated we all are. Because if we recognize that, and if we make our highest intention acting in a way which values that equality, instead of, oh, I'm going to do things my way because I like it, we might do things that are wrong, but I think that in those cases it'll be more out of ignorance than out of indifference or out of evil intention.
Okay. Yeah. Ariel.
In response to that comment about the business of evil, I think that it does in fact set mankind busy on the task of deciding what evil is, and that's what, and that common agreement or common law is the basis of laws that we then, prosecute. So I think that that is actually the impact or the outcome of it. But, in trying to answer the basic question, what is evil? One thing we haven't said, and I think somebody over here said something, life, that which goes against or destroys living things. It seems to me that evil must inherently has to do with consciousness and man's use of thinking. And therefore, it only really matters if it goes against living things. And it has, and again, you think of the forest fire, that cleans out the forest every year and makes it possible for the new plants to grow. It's got to have intentionality, yes. It's got to have intelligence and understanding, but it also has to be going against life in some way.
All right. Tony.
I agree with that. I think, well, if I had to pick whether evil was a noun or a verb, I'd vote for a verb. I think of an example of somebody in a backhoe is backing up on a job site and accidentally runs over a coworker. I don't consider that evil, but if that person turned around, saw the coworker and had just had an argument an hour before and continued to back over that person, that precise deed with the same horrific consequences, I would call that evil because of what was going on in a human brain at the time. So I think it's very wrapped up in humans, not only who's making a decision, who has the free will and is making a bad decision at the time, but also who is receiving, who is suffering in the scenario.
Okay. Scott.
Well, I think there are two basic ways that we pass moral judgments. We can pass moral judgments on actions and on the people who commit them. And it's much easier to pass moral judgment on actions, because there we can see out in the open that's either objectively against life, against human life, or it promotes human life, in which case it's the good. Your example of the stoning, I regard the way that many Muslims treat women as immoral. But for a person who's growing up in a fundamentalist Islamic culture, and they're conditioned to view women in the way that they do, it's more difficult for me to judge them personally as evil or immoral, although I am comfortable in saying that objectively their actions are.
Okay. Carol.
Well, the thought came to me that we have the philosophy that no one should kill. But yet, whenever a criminal does kill someone, and then we have capital punishment where we kill them. So, do we give permission to evil to kill the person who has killed another person? I mean, is it wrong for him to kill someone, and it's okay for us to kill him for doing that? It's an interesting concept.
We could even take it further just to make it more of the case of self-defense, or the case of, let's say, one person versus a whole bunch of people. Let's say a terrorist has taken over a restaurant and he is threatening to blow up everybody in the restaurant. Would it be an evil act to kill him to save a larger group? Or again, is the intent? How does intention come into this? And we're running out of time here, so we'll.
I don't have an answer.
Okay.
Well, let me say this.
And we only have 1 minute.
1 minute.
Yeah.
It seems to me that we have been placing a little too much emphasis on the law and equating evil, if the law defines it evil, is evil. There is a higher law than any law of any culture. And I think if we do not take that into consideration, then we fail to even relate to evil in terms of what its manifestations and what its consequences are.
Okay.
Just brief response. I would argue in the case of the terrorists, both actions are evil, but you'd be selecting the lesser of two evils.
Okay. Good. Maybe anybody has a brief follow-up? Jeff, go ahead.
I was just going to say real quick that I think it partly is a leap of faith.
Okay.
We only live a short time, and we have to decide on what's good and what's evil.
Well, that's the last word, Jeff. This has turned out to be a really tough one. This was a tough one. But I think we made a dent in it, and I really enjoyed the conversation. But now, quickly, I want to pull out a topic for next time. And interestingly enough, I think it's, we'll see what happens here. And the question is free will an illusion? And this was submitted by Bob Miller. So that'll be our next topic. And before we go, I want to mention how you can be on the show. If you write to philosopher@growingagain.com and suggest a topic and tell us a little bit about yourself. If we choose your topic, you can be on the show. And if you're interested in philosophy groups, go to www.teawithsocrates.com, and there's more information on local philosophy groups. And thank you very much for watching.